How do you play nicely together? How do you get along? How do you really communicate clearly and directly? So we have our own way of listening that may not be the most effective, but it's hardwired at this point. It's our habit. And so learning a new way requires a lot of practice.
Stay tuned to hear more about the most important ingredients that can contribute to your professional and personal successes. Here's something you may not have thought of. Did you know that communication skills are one of the key factors used in being hired by a company, or for that matter, in any interaction, whether personally or professionally? My guest, Meredith Bell, co-founder and president of Grow Strong Leaders, which publishes software tools and books that help people build strong relationships in work and in life by offering ways to improve their communication skills. Meredith offers both skill building and character building tools that allow us to review our own communication skills and see where we might need to improve. Welcome, Meredith Bell. What an honor, and I'm so grateful to have you here today, especially with that red blouse on and the red lipstick. You just sparkle and pop out.
Thank you, Terry. Yes. Well, it gives me high energy to wear red. So we'll have a great conversation today, I know.
Tell us a bit about how you got to where you are today.
You know, it's interesting, Terry. I always wanted to be a teacher. And so that was the first career that I pursued. I taught elementary education for a few years. And then I realized, gosh, I get kind of bored doing these same lesson plans. So I got my master's and moved into a supervisory and managerial role where I was actually doing some training for teachers. And I enjoyed that part, but I didn't enjoy the politics or the bureaucracy involved with working at that level. So I ended up going off on my own and kept with this whole training idea. And what I was most fascinated with was helping people communicate with each other. So I started working with leaders and their teams in this whole area of how do you play nicely together? How do you get along? How do you really communicate clearly and directly? And that's honestly been my passion over decades of work. And for a number of years, I was a solopreneur and worked by myself. And then I met this fellow named Denny Coates in 1990, and he and I started collaborating. And in 91, we decided we were compatible enough business-wise in all the areas that count in being business partners that we decided to put our two solo practices together, and we brought in a third partner at that time. And the three of us have now worked together for 32 years. So that in itself is a story, right? I mean, to have it's sort of like having a good marriage, ups and downs. There's all these things where you have to practice these communication skills that you have been teaching others with your business partners. And what happened in the early 90s is we were looking for what's called 360 feedback, that kind of a tool that was in the early days back then. And it was a process of getting feedback, not just from your boss, but from your boss, your peers, and your direct reports. And that's why it was called 360 feedback. And we wanted to use that with clients, but there were not a lot of choices. They were very expensive, and you couldn't change the questions to suit a particular client. And that didn't work for us. So we decided to hire our own software developer and make a major shift from being consultants to being a software company. And so in 1994, we introduced our 360 feedback tool. And this year, we've celebrated 30 years of being in that business. So that's been a huge focus of ours, this assessment that gives people information that will help them understand what are my strengths that other people are seeing, and also where are they saying I'm creating problems for them and I didn't realize it. So it gives them some direction on changes to make that will help the overall effectiveness of the people who work with them. And in that process, we realized we wanted to create some development tools as well. So we have an online system that helps people increase their communication skills by not just watching videos, but actually taking action and working with a coach to help them make improvements over time. And a brand new one that will be coming shortly has the communication skills and what we call character skills that people need in order to really respond in a strong way to life unexpected things, right? And so we believe if people can improve in those two areas, and our focus has always been leadership, our company is Grow Strong Leaders, that if they can become strong in character and communication, they're going to be able to get so much more done with their teams.
As we've talked about, communication is one of my passions as well. And as a executive career business and communications coach, I don't know about you, but I find that most people don't really know the art of communication.
Well, that's true.
And how to communicate with others is such an important, probably one of the most important skills you can have in the business world for sure, and even personally. And I find it astounding as I think that most companies, the strongest skills someone can have are communication skills. What are your thoughts about what I've said, since you are more the expert?
You know, you're absolutely right. Nothing happens without communicating. And it's unfortunate that our educational systems all the way through college typically don't have any kind of courses related to how to be an effective communicator. And most folks don't grow up in homes where the parents model that. And so, we do the best we can, but we don't really learn. How do we listen well? How do we give someone feedback when they have made a mistake so that it's encouraging and supportive and yet is direct and specific? We don't learn these skills. And that's why I think there's so much unnecessary drama and pain in the workplace, because people often are not sure about how to directly address an issue with someone. They avoid it, they repress it, or they let it build up, and then it comes out in a more aggressive way than they would have liked, but they're not sure how to do it. And so that's why we've been on this mission for all these years to help people really learn there are simple things you can do. It's not easy to apply them because we have all these patterns already existing. So we have our own way of listening that may not be the most effective, but it's hardwired at this point. It's our habit. And so learning a new way requires a lot of practice, and we feel support. It's really helpful if you have someone who's a support coach kind of person that you can talk to, that'll hold you accountable, but also give you support and encouragement as you're trying new things.
What comes to mind is today's young people. They text, they use acronyms. And I guess my question is, it's very difficult for someone who's leaving college to enter the business world and try to figure out how to glean communication skills, because most of them don't have it and they're used to texting today. Even people that are already young people that are in the business world, they only know how to short scribe things, if you will.
Well, and that's where I think having someone who is willing to serve as a mentor and, help them learn these things. And that's where our programs come in. They don't require someone to attend a training class. There's online access to videos and other information that can help them understand what is this and what does it look like? And what are some steps I can follow? So it's very practical and useful. And we have books that, coincide with that. And I think that's really the key, is a young person having someone that they work with who is modeling some of these skills in a really positive way so they can learn by observing and then practicing themselves.
You know, I had a client, she was at a very big company, she had a pretty big job. And when we started working together, she was so negative. She had no idea how negative she was. And here was somebody in a pretty high level position until I brought it to her attention. She said, "What? No clue, none." And I'm wondering if she's more the norm than the exception, even today.
Well, part of that goes to self-awareness. And it's interesting. That's like the number one character skill. We have 3 different chunks around character. And we do call them skills because they're not really virtues or traits. They're not a permanent fixture that someone either has or doesn't have it. A skill is basically a behavior pattern that we create over time, whether it's how we hit a tennis ball, a golf club, how we play a musical instrument. All of these are types of behavior. And so character, things like being self-aware, having integrity, exercising patience, all of these are behavior patterns. And I think what you're describing there is a lack of self-awareness, not even realizing how I'm coming across, how I am being in the moment with others. And I think that's really a first step in all of our skill development when it comes to people, is recognizing how I'm sounding, how I'm looking when I say something, and my tone of voice. All those elements go together to create a total message. And so being aware by noticing my own behavior, but also seeking input from others. You don't have to use a formal 360 feedback tool to ask someone. If you and I were working together, Terry, I could just come up to you and say, what's one thing I could do that would make working with me a better experience for you? And of course, it's good to give context for that. So you're not coming to somebody cold and they're going, where's that coming from? But if you first explain, I am working to become a better version of myself, my best possible person. So I would really value your input. What's one thing I could do differently that would help us work together more effectively? However you want to phrase it that sounds natural to you, but asking that of other people in the context of, I want to make improvements. I want to strengthen myself as a leader, as a person, so that I have the greatest possible positive impact with others.
Everyone listening, please take heed to what Meredith is saying, because it is so, so important. Of course, as coaches, we're trained in a lot of ways that one of the biggest thing is listening. Most people don't listen. They've got something going on. Like, how can I sound wonderful in my response? How can I one up this person? What can I say? So they're not even listening to the conversation. They're already in their head figuring out their response without realizing it. So in a way, they miss half the conversation, or the message that's being delivered hasn't enough information in it. So for everybody, I did a presentation called How to Communicate Effectively, Effective Communication. I gave the presentation to people, and you could see their eyes popping out, because that most of what was said, they have no clue about. So tell us a little bit more about the skill builders, what exactly you and your company does.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about listening for a moment, because I'm so passionate about that. Because you're right, Terry, so few people have learned how to do it really well. We listen in order to respond, or offer a rebuttal, or argue, or prove ourselves right. And this one thing can make a huge difference in someone's relationship with everyone else in their lives, whether it's their spouse, a family member, a coworker, their boss, if we learn to just focus our attention on that person so that through our attention, our body language, everything about us is saying to them without even saying the words, you're the most important person in my world right now. So our willingness to give attention to that person and not be distracted by two things. One, what's going on around us. So we're not checking email, text messages, other things that could distract us. And we're also eliminating those internal distractions. And these are even stronger than the external ones. This is our thought process that's going on oftentimes when someone is speaking. And so we're thinking about, how do we feel about what they're saying? Or we don't think they're right about this. And so we're preparing our response. And like you said, you miss some of what they're saying when you're in your head doing that. So if we can just set aside the need to judge, evaluate, criticize, and instead just fully be present to grasp, what is it they're trying to convey to me? And then to say in our own words, well, here's what I'm feeling from you. Here's what I'm hearing from you. Do I have it right? Too often we just assume we've got it, and then we respond, and the person's like, what are you talking about? That's not what I was saying at all. So it helps to check the meaning with the person. Do I have this right? It shows genuine respect and appreciation for them when we slow down enough to do that, or even pause. Most of us are uncomfortable with silence, but if we pause before responding, so they sense that we're giving real consideration to what they're saying, it allows them to open up and tell us more. And that's when we're learning, is when we're listening. We're not learning when we're talking. We're expressing our own opinion, our own thoughts. And so in addition to the communication skills like listening, we have this whole area of what we call character skills, because again, these are behaviors that people can develop with time and grow stronger. And we divided them into 3 different areas because we had a total of 36. And we thought, that's a lot. So chunking them in 3 areas makes it easier to be able to focus and think about these. And of course, it's not the kind of thing you want to improve all of them at once, but which one, if you were to work on it, would make a difference in your relationship with yourself and with others. So the very first area is self. How do you grow a stronger self? So things like what we talked about earlier, self-awareness, self-esteem, self-discipline, along with other behaviors that we don't always think of as necessarily being character related, but humility, courage, composure. How do I stay calm in difficult situations? So that's one group where we're working on ourselves. And then the second area is strengthening relationships. So these are behaviors where how you relate to someone else makes a difference in the quality of the relationship that you're able to build. So a key one is trust. How trustworthy am I, and how much do I trust others? And other elements within that are honesty and integrity, compassion, even forgiveness. And the third group is work ethic. And this has to do with how I approach my work. So things like initiative, responsibility, accountability. How willing am I to own it instead of blaming someone else? Also, things like open-mindedness. Am I willing to hear other ideas? Flexibility. Am I open to changing when the need arises? So that's not a comprehensive description of all 36, but you get an idea of what these involve. And we take a very practical approach, Terry. Let's just use patience as an example, because that's one that many of us struggle with. And so this idea of waiting for the right time, not feeling like we have to push things and control things to get our way in our timing. Because the fact is, the only thing we really have control over is ourselves.
Much more to come. Don't go away. This episode is brought to you by Try Coaching. As an executive career, business, and communications coach, my mission is to help clients change the stories that they have been telling themselves, which may be holding them back. When we remove these limiting beliefs, we can then start optimizing our talents and strengths. Change your story, change your life. Let's start a conversation. You can learn more about me at trycoaching.com.
And so we often can't control situations, whether we're stuck in traffic or in a long line at the grocery store or other places that cause us to have to wait. And the way that we approach this is very practical. It isn't like you watch a video or read some information and now you understand, because that's only the first step. Understanding is one level, but how do you apply this and practice it in everyday life? So in our program, we give lots of examples of ways that people can actually do this. And if you take small steps and do it in little situations, then when you're faced with a bigger one, you've kind of been wiring your brain for that skill, and it's easier to step into it and apply it in a more difficult situation. So if you're in a line, let's say checking out, then it's one of those where you can just decide, I'm going to observe the people around me. I'm going to see if there's anybody standing close to me that I could strike up a conversation with, or I might find something to compliment about what they're doing or read something. We make a choice not to start feeling aggravated, annoyed, and impatient in those situations, but instead choose to stay calm and use patience to just wait until it's our turn or it's time for us to move.
A lot of impactful words here. Very. It's interesting because I work with clients and use a lot of what you said as core values for them. What are they aligned with? What are they out of alignment with? What's working for them? What have they not worked on? Everything we've talked about, for me as an executive business career and communications coach, I work on everything with them, especially choice, which is a brilliant word because we have choice no matter what. As you said, we can stand in a line and get crazy like me, or we can make a choice to take a deep breath and just be.
That's really true. And I'm so glad you mentioned to take a deep breath, because often we forget to do that. And we start breathing in a shallow way and we can get ourselves worked up more and more. And if we can just become, and I know this is a word you like to use, mindful, if we can become more mindful of what feelings are going through us at the moment, and even what thoughts we're having that are triggering the emotions we're feeling. Because usually an emotion is triggered by some thought we've had, about the situation, like, why is this happening to me? Well, and the fact is, it's just happening. This isn't happening to you. I like to think of things happening for me. And so it's a whole different perspective, because then it's, well, how can I use what's happening now to my benefit? What can I learn from what's happening? As opposed to starting to feel anger, agitation, negative feelings that don't serve us well and can cause us to have a negative reaction to someone who's an innocent bystander.
Usually what I have found with clients, if they get a trigger, an emotional trigger from something, it's usually from their past. So they will give a response in the present based on something from their past. And I suggest to clients that when an emotional trigger comes up, you have about a quarter of a second to stop and to make a choice. to think, is this coming from the past or is this present? And then right there in that split second, you can make a choice. And that choice can be something that empowers you or doesn't. And when we can take control and make choices, then we can feel empowered and free rather than being caught up in some past wound or past trauma that's actually triggered by something and coming out now. It's a dance that we all have to do.
And, I think a key word there is noticing, noticing how we're feeling, noticing what's going on inside of us and being willing to pause for, as you say, just a moment to process, because we can process this pretty quickly. And that ties back to, again, to that self-awareness. These character skills, interestingly, are really aligned with emotional intelligence. How I manage myself, how self-aware I am, how I feel about myself, how composed I am in a given moment of unexpected challenges. All of those are around managing self. And then the ones around relationships are that aspect of, EQ about how do I relate to other people? Do I speak the truth? Do I speak up? And am I honest with them in a given situation, or do I hold back? Because we can be dishonest by staying silent when we don't share what we really think or what we really feel, because we're not sure how the person will react to it. We're concerned about consequences. And so this whole area just of honesty, am I honest with myself? But also, am I honest with others? Do I really speak my mind, or do I go along to be more compliant or appear to be, a team player, when I really feel differently and think differently about what's happening here, but I may or may not speak up about it?
I think that goes to part of today's leaders and what's expected of them in how they show up. If you're in a toxic environment, there's no way that you're going to be able to do many of the things you talk about, because it won't be acceptable and you'll probably be fired. However, today, more leaders are being asked to have more EQ characteristics, to be honest, to be open, to be vulnerable, and create that environment so employees can come to them and tell them how they feel. That wasn't the norm a long time ago. You kind of went along to get along so you didn't get fired. But today we're moving, hasn't quite happened, in a very, very different direction, where there's a safe space for people to communicate, as you said.
And, I think a key aspect of that, Terry, is asking questions. That's another really great communication skill. And I think it also ties in with a character skill like trust. Because if we trust others, then in turn, we're going to be trusted by them. And it takes kind of faith in people to have that trust and extend that. But this is where questions to me are so powerful. Because if we have, let's say, a project we want to have someone complete, it doesn't work well, as you said, just to tell and give directions and then send them on their way. To ask questions like, what other information would you need to make sure this is a successful project and you're able to complete it by the deadline? What can I do to support you? So that they feel you're on their side. You're not just waiting to see, are they going to, follow through or not? Do I have to micromanage this person to make sure they do everything? We're looking at giving them the resources they need, the authority they need to run with it. So we're not hung up on the how. We just want them to know what it is we want them to do. And that is something we can teach people over time by getting them to think for themselves. What do you think is your first step with this? What would you consider success? What will that look like for you? So there are many different kinds of questions where we can engage people. And, one of the other tying in with communication skills that's so important for leaders is the ability to ask questions when people come to them looking for answers. Because a lot of times, have you seen this with your clients? They start feeling overwhelmed because they feel like they have to answer everybody. They need to be the one that provides the solution to everyone. And part of that is their own sense of, well, that's what it means to be the leader. I'm supposed to have the answers. But in reality, one of the biggest responsibilities of a leader is teaching others to be self-reliant and building their confidence. And so asking questions when someone comes to you with a problem or a situation to say, well, what have you thought of doing? What options are you considering? What are the pros and cons of each one of those? So you're helping them learn that before they come to you, they need to think things through so that they come and they say, here's the situation. I've looked at A, B, and C. I think we ought to go with B for these reasons. And so that's a skill that you're helping others acquire, that ability to think for themselves.
And I'm sure you find this, I find this in coaching. Clients think we have the answers all the time, and they look for that. And, my answer is, I don't have the answers, but you do. I know I have those answers for myself, but I'm not you. And it's a misconception that people think coaches have all the answers, but we don't on any level.
Right. And that's like with managers too. Anyone in a leadership role, it's okay to say, I don't know. Let's find out together. Or why don't you take that on as a research project and come back so we both then know about this in more detail. It's really okay to acknowledge that, because what you're doing is then creating a safe environment where that person feels like they can say to you, I don't know, or admit when they make a mistake instead of covering it up or blaming someone else. That's where that whole psychological safety, the willingness to be open, vulnerable with others and acknowledge that you're not perfect. Because you know what, Terry, they already know you're not perfect. They've seen whoever the leader is, make mistakes. And the quicker that the leader will own up to things and own things, it makes it safe for others to also acknowledge their own imperfections and ask for help when they need it. So they don't feel isolated, alone, and abandoned by the leader or other members of the team.
And I loved you had a quote by Napoleon Hill on your site on self-discipline. Self-discipline begins with the mastery of your thoughts. If you don't control what you think, you can't control what you do. I think that's the foundation for everything. Self-discipline and self-awareness kind of are the cornerstones for everything else. If you're not aware, then you don't do, or you don't know how to speak up, or you haven't figured it out. And, discipline daily helps you focus and helps your mind focus and move forward rather than having it be all over the place. That's just my assessment.
Well, I think you're absolutely right that those are really key areas. And I love that quote that you mentioned, because the idea of managing your thoughts, we can't keep a thought from coming into our brains. I think of them sometimes as clouds floating by, right? The problem we get into is when we believe these thoughts are the truth. And sometimes it's just a thought. And if we don't believe it, then we're likely not to act upon it. And then we don't get into the trouble that we could otherwise.
Most people don't know that. They don't know a thought can be like a cloud. It doesn't mean anything. It's just you rent space up there to the ego, right? Or the gremlin, or whatever you want to call it. And it just goes on and on and on. And that's what we listen to, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think, again, that as we raise our awareness and listen to what is happening up there, we realize we can invite more of certain kinds of things that we say to ourselves. And that, to me, is why positive declarations or affirmations are so valuable, because we're affirming that which we want to be and not focusing on whatever negative thoughts came in instead. So if we start feeling like, oh, I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough, we can say, that's not true. I forgive myself for thinking that temporarily, when the truth is, I'm totally worthy. I have worked for this. I've earned it. I deserve the good things that are happening to me right now. So if we kind of refute the negative thought that comes in with one that affirms our strengths, affirms who we really are at heart, and not who we sometimes tell ourselves we are, because that what we describe to ourselves may not be true.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love that you said that. As a coach, one of the things I've observed over the years is most people are feeling in their inner self not worthy, not valued, not good enough. And one of the interviewees that I just had said it's called the not good enough pandemic. And if that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, then that's what's going to show up. Limiting beliefs, assumptions that we all come to the party with, if you will. And that's the crux of helping people on many levels, including self-awareness, being worthy, self-discipline. How do you communicate and, not listening to that voice in a way, and really taking control of that?
I think you're so right. We take our power back when we say, I'm going to pay attention to the thoughts that I'm having about myself or even about others. Because what I have found, Terry, tell me if this is true for you too, when I am least tolerant of others, it's because there's something going on within me that I'm unhappy with, that I'm not tolerating about myself. And so I end up projecting it to others. Why is that person doing that? Or why isn't she doing this? And as soon as I catch myself saying, why is that, that kind of question or thought, I just pause and say, all right, what's going on with you? What is it you're aggravated with yourself about? Because that's really what I can change. And when I can adjust my attitude towards myself and be more gracious to myself, give myself some grace, and just ease up a bit on that inner criticism, I am much more accepting of others and more loving and kind with others. And it starts with being loving and kind to ourselves.
This has been so impactful and such information. This is one of my passions, and I know it's yours, and we could be here for 3 hours going back and forth. Yet we're on the same wavelength. You have said so many really fabulous nuggets today. Can you give our audience one or two things that you can leave them with?
Yes. Here's a very specific idea on appreciating someone else. Because, it's one thing to give positive feedback to somebody or pay them a compliment. But what if you think about someone that you tend to have struggles with? You are butting heads, or there's tension or friction between you. If before you meet with them, you write down, what are 8 things you value about this person? Why is this individual important to you? then what that does is it refocuses your brain on those positive things about that person. And so when you interact with them, you're going to have a different attitude towards them, and they're going to pick up on that. People, we're all vibrating energy. That's not woo-woo. It's real. You can pick up a positive or negative vibe from somebody. So if you've been investing time up front, thinking in a positive way and making notes about what it is you appreciate about this person, then when you actually are talking to them, you're going to respond to them in a different way than you might have otherwise. So my tip would be prepare yourself mentally and emotionally when you're going to have a conversation with someone so that you focus on what you appreciate about them. And what happens is then when you interact with them, they appreciate in value in your own mind, and they also appreciate in value in their own mind. And to me, that's one of the greatest gifts we can give someone else. And it's one of the most important responsibilities of leaders is help people live into their individual areas of greatness.
Beautifully said, as this whole conversation has been. If people want to reach you, Meredith, let us know where you can be reached.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn most often. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter or X. And there's also a way you can reach me on our website, growstrongleaders.com. That's where you can learn more about what we have to offer, learn more about our books, and you can also set up a time to talk with me.
Excellent. Grow Strong Leaders. That's the name of the game today. Grow Strong People. I will go to there. And wouldn't it be great if we all could grow into amazing people?
Yes.
Meredith, this has been wonderful. I knew it would be, and I so appreciate your being here. To me, you are a guiding light in so many ways. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Terry. I appreciate your words, and it was great to be here with you.
I hope this compelling and extraordinary conversation with Meredith Bell has offered you thoughts on how you can create your own changes by making choices that matter to you. Reviews encourage people to listen to my podcasts and lets all the platforms know that this podcast is reputable. Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. Thank you. For related content on extraordinary work, please visit my website, trycoaching.com. And always, always remember, when you work with passion and purpose, your work can become extraordinary. Meet Daniel Gomez, an award-winning keynote speaker, business coach, corporate trainer, and international best-selling author of The Makings of a Millionaire Mind. You won't want to miss this episode where you'll learn more about how to unlock your untapped potential in both business and in life.